Okay, you're the few and the proud. Now we thought we'd open up, let's just lay out Shelley actually wrote this down so she could do this, but I'll open it up by saying.
Go for it, Bob.
We agreed to do a few minutes of introductory remarks based on our reflections of what we've heard this morning and over the last few days, and what we think the lay of the land is and so forth. And then we're going to ask each other a series of questions that will take up maybe 25 minutes or so. And then we're going to devote the second half of this program to you. And we want to focus on you and us, I guess I should say this, all of us, and what our to-do list is going to be over the next year. You know, we're at this very exciting moment in time, as we've heard. You know, this morning we've got progressive leadership in this state house and in state houses across the country. We've got an extraordinary team that's been assembled by President Obama, and boy, it still sounds good to say that, doesn't it? And extraordinary both cabinet, sub-cabinet, and agency head. So this is a moment in time when we can move from being a kind of conclave or a group of the dedicated few to becoming a true mass movement and really transforming our society. And so the question for all of us during this coming year is how we work together at home, in our own communities, our own states, but also collectively, how we work together to build a national agenda around transit, rail, livable communities, sustainable communities, whatever the label is that you'd like to use. So let's begin with the opening remarks.
Okay.
Shelley, you want to open up?
Great. Well, this has been a terrific Rail Volution. I think I've been at virtually every one, and I think there's just this energy and enthusiasm that I'm seeing in the hallways and in the discussions. It's really terrific, and there are 900 of us who've come together, and that's a big number. And I also wanted to thank a few people who I think have really been instrumental in making this particular Rail Volution so wonderful to be at. The work that Congressman Blumenauer puts in all year long to make this really, truly impactful is truly remarkable. And Miki Blizzard, his staff person, has been on the phone probably at least once a week all year long trying to help make this happen. So she has been tremendously important in making Rail Volution happen this year. Mary Simon, who's the staff person, who every moment of every day for the last year in between Rail Volutions is really, you know, she's keeping this motley crew together, and the amount of work that she puts in every year is remarkable. The Rail Volution Steering Committee, which I can't even believe it, but these guys meet like 3 or 4 times a year for days on end to figure out how to make the program interesting and relevant and cutting edge, and they're all doing this on a volunteer basis. And the local host committee here, who, led by Christina Egan, has just done phenomenal work to help us really understand what's special about Boston and try to help us engage in learning from a new place. As she said at the opening session, this is the first time we've been in the Northeast, and there's a lot to see here. So first, let's just thank everybody for putting so much work in. So those of you who know me know that I am leaving my home of 25 years in Oakland, California, and I'm moving to Washington, D.C. And I really couldn't pass up the opportunity of getting to work in this assignment. It's incredibly exciting because the people that I'm working with within HUD, within the administration, within a whole litany of different agencies, I can't believe the talent and the commitment to the same set of issues we've been talking about for 13 years. Secretary Donovan last week gave a speech at Harvard, and he talked about how the role of the Department of Housing and Urban Development has always been about communities and about housing in various different ways, but that increasingly we are focusing on community development as our core mission and the role that places can play in revitalizing our economy. And it's just a really different conversation that's happening right now. So we'll have a lot of time to talk about this during this session, but I guess my one message that I want to make sure you hear from me is that we've been talking at Rail Volution about livable communities. And I'd like us to step up and make sure that we're really talking about communities and not just about the transportation piece of communities. And so there's a broader array of partners that all of us need to really start engaging with, having serious conversations about how we can make sure that our communities can thrive and that we are weaving in a broader set, on a broader agenda than the transportation piece of livable communities. I'm engaged in discussions now about the importance of having grocery stores and healthy food available in urban places, the challenges of the foreclosure crisis, the role of energy efficiency in climate change, the capacity of community-based organizations to engage in change that happens at the community-based level. We need to broaden our partners and think about livable communities in the true sense of what livability is all about. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Bob and tell us what you were thinking.
Well, I'll open up with some personal comments or thoughts, and that is, I think some of you know, at least it's been a while now, but I came to Boston in 1972 to work for the Boston Redevelopment Authority and worked there and trained in what I used to call the Kevin H. White School of Public Affairs, which was a kind of hardball politics and so forth. And then I went to, still open, hey, oh, sorry, thank you. Hey, how are you? And then I went to work for Mike Dukakis in 1974, I guess it was, 75. And Mike Dukakis, you heard him yesterday, has this passion about cities, passion about transit. The man goes out and hugs the streetcars whenever he has an opportunity and so forth, and it's real. And he pulled together a very extraordinary group of people who, many of whom are now active in these issues, not just in Massachusetts, but across the country. And so this is home, and it's good to see the restoration. I used to call it the People's Republic of Massachusetts, and it's kind of back, progressive leadership and smart people running these agencies, and that gives us hope. I ended up in New York because at the time it became clear to me that government can't do this job alone. That it really is up to civic leaders and business leaders and civic organizations like Regional Plan in New York, and we're really the granddaddy of these groups. We've been in business for almost 90 years now in promoting all the things that we're talking about here, about promoting the success of cities like New York City, but a network of cities large and small, a lot of older industrial cities and so forth, and then the transportation networks that support the economy and mobility in our region, and we've had our shoulders behind that issue now for 9 decades, and it's not something that begins and ends, and it requires continued commitment and real persistence. One of the things we've learned in projects like the 2nd Avenue subway in New York, these things don't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen in one administration, that it requires sustained leadership. When I was teaching at UMass in Amherst, I had a department head who was a former Israeli tank commander, Mayor Gross, and Mayor used to tell me when I'd get frustrated, some of you know Bob's nodding here, I'd get frustrated with the university bureaucracies, and Secretary Mullen, the good news, you're running a state bureaucracy, nothing like a university bureaucracy, but and Mayor would tell me, look, Yaro, he says, T, things take time, and things really do take time, and so we have this magical moment here where we have national leadership that for the first time ever is looking across the silos and how to make what has basically been a dysfunctional national government functional, and how we can get the national government to support activities in the states and in our metropolitan areas that will support the outcomes that we're talking about here. But this is not just a short-term project. This is something that is going to begin now and will have to be sustained over a generation or longer. At Regional Plan about 5-6 years ago, we started a program called America 2050, and some of you may be familiar with the work that we've been doing. Very modest goal of creating a national development and infrastructure strategy for the United States, which sounds like a totally crazy thing for a small not-for-profit to do, but we've been working in partnership with other metropolitan civic groups across the country, other like-minded individuals, about 150 groups focused on 11 mega regions like the Northeast and the Piedmont Atlantic region and the Southeast and so forth, all over the country, with the goal of creating a national infrastructure investment, community building strategy that will accommodate 140 million additional Americans by mid-century. And that's a 40% increase in the population of the country in 4 decades. We're going to have to build nearly as much housing and as much new commercial and retail and other development in this country over the next 4 decades as we have over the past 4 centuries. And if we get it right, we have the potential to heal and undo a lot of the mistakes that were done in the post-World War II era in this country. If we do it badly, it's a disaster for all of the people and all of the places and all of the issues that we care about. So that's the challenge. We've got got a couple of generations, and I like to tell my students at Penn that, or by the way, this generation of graduate students at universities across the country, most altruistic, most committed to public service group that I've ever seen, and they're ready to throw themselves into this issue. I tell them, look, the bad news, kids, is that our generation of Americans has left you with $10 trillion in debt and a set of seemingly insoluble problems. Good news is you get to fix it on your watch. A daunting challenge, but that's the challenge. Where do we put 140 million additional people? It isn't going to be easy. We need to, and the reason that we keep meeting every year like this is that we're talking about turning around an entire civilization that was built around cheap energy and cheap land and cheap water and a lot of other cheap things, I guess, and transforming it into a civilization that at least can give people the options of living in. And I'll use the word dense, sorry, I know it's not politically correct, but dense, urban and suburban places with alternatives to single occupant driving and so forth. But it is turning around the values of a civilization. It's got to come back to changing values and changing behavior. That's hard stuff to do. It doesn't happen, because we have a new talented Secretary of Transportation. It happens because all of us work together in our communities across the country to do those things. And again, let me just close with one last thought, and that another good news, bad news thing. The bad news is that we've had 60, 70 years of low-density, throwaway sprawl in this country, automobile-based sprawl. The good news, we've had 70 years or 65 years of low-density, throwaway, automobile-based sprawl. We've got the opportunity to infill and redevelop and remagnetize every city and suburb in the country to accommodate the growth that's coming. If we do it the right way, we transform all of these places for the better and make sure that all of the values that we care about, a country that's more competitive globally. And by the way, we got to keep our eye on the rearview mirror in a way in this country that we haven't for a century. That right behind us, the Chinese and the Indians and the Europeans are working very hard to take advantage of the lack of focus and the lack of investment in this country on real economic activities as opposed to the casino stuff that's going on, for the last generation at least in this country. So we got to invest, or we're going to get run over. We got to do it in creative and positive ways. And if we do that, we create a much brighter future for the next generation of Americans and the one after that. But the question now before us is and maybe I'll just dig right into this if that's okay. And by the way, it's funny, in preparing for this, I said to Shelley, Shelley, I know you've been the term of art in Massachusetts is bomb chaka. You still use that term up here, I suspect, in Worcester and places like that, right?
I don't pronounce it that way, but sure.
Yeah. Okay, there you go. Sure. So outside of Boston, the term is bomb chucker, and what it really means is people who do what many of us do, which is we throw rocks at authority, it's figuratively. And so I said to Shelley, now that you're a public official, you really can't do that stuff anymore, so maybe I should take the tough questions. And she said, well, no, sorry, I'm going to keep taking those tough questions. So here, let's start with this one. So if we're going to accommodate the 140 million people, we have this little problem. We have, I think is it 64,000 municipal governments in this country?
Some huge number.
Something like that.
Huge number, yeah.
And half of them are here in Massachusetts, I think. And, every little bitty place in Massachusetts, 351 of them, thinks of itself as an independent republic, and it's both a challenge and an opportunity, because that's where the leadership for a lot of these issues is going to come from. But how do we convince these communities to change? And then in a moment we'll talk about what the federal role is. But basically, how does this movement, how do the folks in this room seize this opportunity at the local level?
Well, Deputy Secretary Ron Sims talks a lot about this urgency, and he continually reminds us that we have about 2 or 3 years to really change the dialogue. Derek Douglas from the White House, who came to the session yesterday, has been calling me almost daily saying, how are we going to get these issues that you and I know are so important up on the priority list for Rahm Emanuel? And in so many ways, I think that we need to really embrace the urgency that all of us are feeling and find ways of communicating to the people in various towns and townships and local decision makers that we really can't afford to wait much longer, that our economy is suffering tremendously. There's all kinds of evidence. Scott Bernstein, who's here, has been mapping the convergence between the foreclosure crisis and the drive to qualify neighborhoods. We've got to get a grip. And in some ways, I just am getting tired of the, la-di-da, this is all going to be wonderful story that many of us are telling. And I think that we need to get a narrative framed up that says we can continue to grow on our path that we're on right now. 140 million Americans continue to build in the way that we've been building, and this is what we'll get for that. What if we take this other path? It's going to help us be resilient. It's going to help our people have more money in their pockets. It's going to help local government save money or be able to spend money on things other than extending infrastructure in the wrong places. It will save our environment. It will help us at least be able to have something good to say about the climate and how we're addressing it. And it's responding to the realities of what our country's all about right now. So demographics have changed. We've been talking about this at Rail Volution for umpteen zillion years. The market, the real estate market, is going to come back, as Jonathan Rose said the other day, and it's going to be different than it was before this crash. And we have to all be out there saying how incredibly important it is to make it possible for this market to be realized and to deal with these issues now and not push it off for another 5-10 years. But this is really the moment. I mean, if we're going to take advantage of the partnership that's there now from the federal government, don't waste any time, because it won't be there unless we actually accomplish something. So
Okay.
that's my 2 cents on that.
Okay. Want me to jump in on that, or should we move to the next question?
Yeah, let's go to the next one.
Okay. Okay. Your turn, right?
Oh, right.
Yeah, that's
so,
right.
so you can see this is
Thank
highly
you, Gracie.
scripted. Highly scripted.
Yeah, we spent about 20 minutes working this up to. So if it seems impromptu, it's fairly impromptu.
It's good, though.
Yeah.
So, well, we didn't want to also repeat a lot of stuff that had been said in previous sessions. So we're trying really hard to kind of build on what's happened at Rail Volution. So, Bob, you are someone who has been in the field, working on these important issues for decades, leading this incredible coalition in the New York metro region that has been all about the same set of principles that Rail Volution is all about. What do you think the best federal role is? What should we be doing that would actually enable your region and the other regions that you're working in to start embracing these ideas more quickly?
Oh, sure. Let me hold. How's that? Is that better? Okay. So that when I face you, they can hear me. That's a good thought. Well, a couple of things. One is just remind now you're a Fed, okay, so I can say this. It's a federal republic, and that whether we're from Massachusetts or New York or Oregon or any of the other states and so forth, that the leadership has to come from the states and from regions and from communities. And we were talking over breakfast today, and whether it's the Second Avenue subway or the Red Line in Baltimore or the new rail line between Minneapolis and St. Paul, the leadership for these projects or the community development that goes on around them, the leadership cannot come from Washington. It has to be locally generated and then supported from Washington. But the federal government can create enormous, and powerful incentives, I think, for the right things to emerge locally. And it can promote these progressive impulses from below. Bruce Babbitt, the former Interior Secretary, uses a term, a conditionality, which I think is a really important one. And it basically means that the federal government can provide some very powerful incentives, fairly modest cost. I mean, what we've seen, the almost a feeding frenzy around the high-speed rail money and so forth, $8 billion, which is a lot of money, but it's not a lot of money given the magnitude of the challenge of building a national high-speed rail system. And we've seen politicians all over the country performing what I would describe as unnatural acts, doing in some cases total reversals. Charlie Crist in Florida has gone from being apathetic at best to high-speed rail to now being a reasonably enthusiastic supporter. And it simply took this fairly modest incentive from the feds, FRA playing a little bit of hardball, saying that unless you show us a local match and a commitment to regional rail and local transit to support high-speed rail, don't bother sending in a final proposal and so forth. And we're seeing, enormous enthusiasm being unleashed. My favorite example of conditionality was when the federal government, after decades of discussion, decided that we needed a national drinking age or a national seatbelt law, and basically they threatened to withhold 1% of transportation funding, and all of the discussions about states' rights and all this stuff went out the window, and within a matter of months in each case, every state adopted a national state seatbelt law in conformance to the national standard, and the same thing with the drinking age. We can do this with a lot of these other things, whether it's transit-oriented development or communities that are designed around sidewalks, or all of the things that we're talking about here. So conditionality is one thing. Second thing is leadership and the bully pulpit, and the best guy in the world to be advancing these principles is probably Barack Obama, and the second best people are people like your secretary and Ron Sims and others who can use the bully pulpit that the federal government provides. And it's basically what Sean was doing at Harvard this week. and that he's been doing and others have been doing across the country. And the fact that it isn't just one agency now, that in fact it's the entire federal government. Ray LaHood has, I think, surprised a lot of us in a very pleasant and positive way by being one of the leading advocates for this thing. And as a former Republican congressman from the middle of the country, why that's a great kind of person to have as an advocate for these principles. And then finally, I think it's promoting and enabling and incentivizing this bottom-up leadership at the community level, promoting and incentivizing these collaborations between civic leaders and business leaders and local and state elected officials in support of livable community or smart growth investments and policies. I think can make an enormous difference. And again, thinking about this as building foundations for change that will occur over a generation or two, that in fact what the federal government can do is essentially promote the establishment of coalitions and partnerships at the local and regional level that in fact can sustain these ideas over that longer period of time.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Okay, that's a thought.
I like that.
Okay. All right, let's, moving on here a little bit. Okay, this is a question for Shelley that I thought was kind of, Shelley's leading the new Sustainable Communities Initiative, which is it's housed in HUD, but it's a partnership between HUD and DOT and the Environmental Protection Agency. It's the first time that our government has done this. And by the way, if you go to places like Germany or the UK or Japan or other places we're competing with, they've all done this. They've all created these new cross-cutting collaborations between national agencies to promote the changes that we're talking about here that cut across the silos. So tell us how, so that's it's never happened before in our government, in the federal government. I mean, Massachusetts, by the way, Massachusetts reestablished the development cabinet. I mean, Mike Dukakis started the development cabinet here 30 years ago, but it's never been done in Washington. And so how do you go about doing that? And that's the first part of the question. The second part is, how can folks in the room help you do it? Because again, life is short and administrations
That's
are even
right.
shorter. And so we need to make sure that the time is well spent and your efforts are successful. So how do you do those things?
Well, a lot of the ingredients that you mentioned, leadership, the bully pulpit, accountability, expecting partnerships to be the drivers behind the way that we make change happen. Those are all ingredients to this initiative. And it's been an incredible opportunity. I think you heard in the previous sessions, representatives from HUD and Department of Transportation, Environmental Protection Agency, all singing the same tune. When we went on a livability tour with the 3 agency leads, I couldn't believe how well they worked together and that their values really were aligned. The challenge now is to drive that down within our own agencies, and to help support the work of communities that are really trying to embrace these ideas at the local level. So we, at HUD, we have a kind of request in for the 2010 federal budget. We're hoping that gets approved by the end of this calendar year, and it's going to provide about $150 million worth of grants to help communities put in place the plans and put in place the implementation tools to build more sustainable and livable communities. We're going to be asking for a lot with those grants. We're going to be asking for interdisciplinary teams, multi-jurisdictional teams, cross-agency teams, and multi-sector teams. We don't think that it's going to be possible to put in place a regional plan that truly is able to leverage the way that we grow and the types of infrastructure investments we're putting into positive outcomes unless you find the right collaborators to make that happen. So one thing that'll be really different about the Sustainable Communities Initiative is that it's not going to be exclusively government-led, government-operated. And I think we're looking for some real innovative ideas about how to do that. A portion of this money is to help communities put in place zoning codes and other kinds of implementation tools that will help us break through so that more of development can happen as of right, that follows through on the plans that we're all creating together. And many of the folks at Rail Volution have been the people who have created those codes, those models, various other tools. Now's the time to really deploy those and take them to scale. The third thing I would say is that we need to train and educate a lot of people to be able to be the worker bees of this movement. It's not going to be just the federal government that's going to do it. We need a lot of people who are able to understand what we're talking about, how we're going to do it, what are we going to do, and so there's going to be a tremendous emphasis on training, capacity building, tools, resources, so that people, many, many more people, are able to play their role effectively and understand the linkages between these issues. And the last piece I would say is that within each of our agencies, we're looking at changing the everyday rules by which we do things. So about a month ago, Secretary Donovan announced that through our partnership, we had realized that it was essentially impossible to build federally assisted housing on cleaned up brownfield sites. That the rules that HUD was using to review applications for development on a site that had been cleaned up to residential standards essentially made it impossible. And so we just changed the rules. And now you can do this. We're now looking at the community development block grants. And how can we use that funding source as a possible match for transportation and water infrastructure investments? We're looking at, we're looking at ways in which we can do a better job of targeting the funds that we have to help people reduce the combined costs of housing and transportation expenditures. We're working with all of our partner agencies to try and really dig in to see, what it is that if we just change some rules here and there, protocols, got rid of some practice that is often used but isn't written down, that we would unlock a new field of expertise and efforts. So one of the things that would be enormously helpful is to know what those small things are, those big things are that would, if we just change the rules, it would make a difference. The other thing that would make a really pretty big difference is to be able to have this initiative have authority to operate into the future. And now, as a federal representative, I'm prohibited from lobbying. But Senator Dodd has proposed a bill called the Livable Communities Act. Congressman Perlmutter is introducing a House version of this that would essentially direct the federal agencies, the 3 federal agencies, to continue to work together over the next 6 years. And that is the kind of time frame that we need in order to actually make a difference. Because right now, we're just collaborating mainly because our bosses told us to and because actually we know each other and love each other. But I want it to be...
When has that happened before?
I know, right. That's never happened. But I want this to be the way. And we're going to need additional legislative help to make this be the way. So those are some of the things that we're going to be doing. But Bob, what are some of the other ingredients that are necessary to get to scale in this? It's not just going to be the feds.
Right. Yeah. First, I'm not constrained from lobbying, and I will say, and we've worked closely with Senator Dodd on that legislation, livable communities legislation, and we urgently need to find bipartisan leadership in both houses for that legislation. So those of you from parts of the country where they have progressive congressional delegations, particularly in the House, we're going to need your help. And Shelley can't lobby, I can. So if you want to come up afterwards, we're also very interested in finding Republican co-sponsors in both houses that we can get behind that. And basically, what it does is to take this livable communities initiative that's been created essentially by agreement between the three agencies, and institutionalize it in what the federal government does, and provide some resources essentially for these incentive-based planning grants and implementation programs around the country that can go out to communities and to regions across the country. So this has got to be the most important thing that we can do, is to get that legislation to happen and to institutionalize this important idea. Beyond that, some things. I'm in the civic sector, and I really do believe that creating partnerships between civic and business and community organizations and local and state governments is the best way to move these things forward. And so I think finding, we've got to break out of the kind of traditional role between the federal government and MPOs. And metropolitan planning organizations, in most cases, are not MPOs, they're MTOs. They're metropolitan transportation organizations. And we need to broaden this out to encompass all of the elements, housing, land use, environment, energy, public health, and so forth, that are built into the livable communities concept. And so it's going to require the transformation not only of the MPOs, and we have a real challenge, because there are some good MPOs and some excellent people in the MPOs, but then there are a number of these agencies that are essentially dysfunctional because they aren't really metropolitan organizations at all. They're collections of local interests that come together and roll each other's logs around transportation investments. Sorry, I can say those things. And so in many cases, we got to start over again, or we got to, or as we used to say, return them for regrooving. And so really dating myself now. And so I think creating true partnerships between the public and business and civic sectors to develop and promote the implementation of local livability and sustainability plans. It's transportation, housing, environment, land use, energy, all of these things pulled together for the first time. Is exactly what we need to be doing. I think there's some things, another good news, bad news thing. The bad news is that, we had a rough year in Washington and Wall Street and so forth, and the bad news is that the federal government now owns Fannie and Freddie and all the others, FHA, VA, they always own those, and so forth. Well, the good news is the government owns Fannie and Freddie and FHA and VA and so forth, and, for decades, these agencies have been pushing money out the door that's been financing the ex-urban development that was basically the focal point of the housing collapse. And we had a system of transportation finance aided and abetted by the planning. Well, planning is a strong word. Zoning activities of most of our local governments, that promoted this, a vast oversupply of large lot development at the edges of our metropolitan areas. This is where the foreclosure crisis is overwhelmingly concentrated. There's another side, subprime in inner city neighborhoods and so forth, that it's a separate issue. But the big part of the housing bubble, and a big part of the collapse of the housing bubble, is related to the way to what we finance in the housing markets now. These are all federally controlled agencies, and with the complicity of local zoning authorities. And so we got to get that right. I mean, and I know this is tough stuff to be talking about. The government actually playing a role in directing the financial institutions to support the public interest. I know those are it's a tough concept. I'm kidding. You know, I mean, we basically had a system that, you know, nearly took down the U.S. economy, the banking system, and the global economy. So wouldn't it be a nice time to be thinking about changing the way we finance housing and other investments? So I think that's something that needs to happen. And the last thought is just that we've got to the only applause in these presentations so far was when you announced efforts to cut red tape, and so that's something the public actually likes. And I know in New York, you know, we have this quandary. You know, when we put together these 5-year capital plans for the MTA every year, we count on getting 30% from FTA. And by the way, the discussion yesterday or day before yesterday about getting 90% or 80%, I like that, because we've been getting 30% from Washington. But that 30% is then chewed up in the 30 to 40% in additional costs and the delays going through the federal EIS process and the federal procurement procedures and so forth. So this is a really expensive hobby. You know, if we had a crisis, maybe we could think about changing the way we do these environmental and other regulatory reviews and the federally required procurement processes that add years or even decades. Joe Marie, the Connecticut Transportation Secretary, you know, told me that, and telling anybody he can find that will listen, is that even when they develop a concept for an important transportation improvement in Connecticut, it takes 10 years to get it in the ground. And term-limited elected officials and impatient public, we don't have 10 years to put these things into the ground. We got to. So I think cutting some red tape and again, you need to go back to your secretary and describe the applause line that you had here, which is we're cutting red tape, and everybody, maybe we could do it again. We're going to cut red tape, right? And we're going to, hey!
Yay! Well, you know.
I have one other anecdote, and that is
sorry.
just really quick. No, this is, and I'll turn it over to you. I mentioned this to Shelley at breakfast that I was at a forum last year that Brookings put on, boy, about as dry a topic as you can imagine. The German transportation minister coming over to talk about the new federal goods movement plan that the German government had just adopted, and goes on to describe how they got 22 Länder, or however many states they have. It's a federal republic, and 9 adjoining countries and the European Union and Brussels and so forth to buy into this new nationwide goods movement strategy. And so I was asked to lead the response panel, and so I opened a very bright, capable young transportation secretary, the kind of person we could have used here and we have here now. And so my response, I was supposed to ask, well, what are the implications for us? And I said, well, I guess here's the first question. I said, gee, if we had a federal government, do you think we could develop a national transportation strategy? You know, and so the good news is we've got this, enlightened group of people running the government, and so we're really depending on you, Shelley, to kind of move ahead you and your colleagues to move this agenda forward.
Well, depending, schmending. I mean,
that's where we can turn it over to the public.
The weight is pretty heavy. I mean, I'm fine to step up here, guys, but I'm going to need your help. And this is not the time to be quiet. This is the time to be really, really loud and to be as courageous as you possibly can, because that's what is going to make a difference. We have this opportunity. The window is open, or the door is open. See, I'm really bad at analogies. Let's walk through it. And, please.
We jump out of windows and walk through doors. That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
That's right.
Yes,
I know.
Right.
See?
That's right.
I'm terrible at these analogies.
Yeah, that's right.
Please let me and all of my colleagues at the federal level know what is getting in the way. And please, when it's time to educate your local delegation about the challenges that you're having or the things you want to do, go do it. We all have to now be activists. And this has been a culture at Rail Volution for a lot of years, but now more than ever, we really need to do that. I think we're going to open it up for questions. We have these 2 mics.
We want to focus on the kind of to-do list here, the action agenda for the coming year, and how each of us can play a part in advancing this agenda. Yes, sir.
Tom Schrout from St. Louis. Shelley, when you talk about these ideas, what kind of reaction are you getting from the career people, speaking of red tape?
Well, you know, I can mostly speak to the career folks at HUD. I think there is a big sigh of relief that's happened inside the agency. I mean, we do have the same demographic profile as the other agencies, where actually a majority of our staff are heading toward retirement. So we are going to have a big turnover in several years. And part of what we're doing with this initiative called the Transformation Initiative is to get ready for that. But the folks that have been there a long time, frankly, many of them came in because they had a real passion for communities. And this secretary is supporting that again. So, and they know an awful lot about how these programs work. So there's a lot of interest. There are people who don't want to change. But I think that we're moving toward a performance-based system at HUD. One of the things that I didn't mention, which could be relevant to this group, is that we will be restructuring HUD and empowering the regional and local field offices so that not all decisions have to be run up the flagpole to Washington, D.C., and so that regional folks can actually make decisions and form real working partnerships with their colleagues. And that has gotten a lot of really positive feedback from the career staff. So the more that we can, you know, build the institution to really have a sense of self-confidence again, I think that's going to be really key to getting the career staff engaged and you know, not in the way. Yeah.
So Scott?
Hi, Scott Bernstein, Chicago. Thank you, first of all, both of you, for a really good framing. I think conditionality is a good thing to talk about. I recall when you and I met with Bruce Babbitt, and he told us about it. I think he said it was that doing it is a matter of readiness.
Yes.
Expect stuff to happen and be ready to swoop in and do it. Planning doesn't work in a linear sort of fashion. And that means being ready for expected as well as unexpected events. So to your point about foreclosures, Shelley, the bad news is all the economists tell us we're looking at least 2 more years of unemployment growth, despite Newsweek thinking the recession is over. So even in Portland, 12% unemployment, Chicago, 10.5%. I mean, one point, just to challenge you and everybody in this room, is how do we make this movement aimed at the economy instead of aimed at getting the stuff built and then scoring how good we think it is for the economy? It's a fundamental shift, and I think it's really important in all these requirements you talked about, Shelley, for the programs that are upcoming, that shift happen not haphazardly, that you actually look for who's willing to actually use what we got to take it on. I'd be interested in any thoughts you've got in that regard. The foreclosure crisis in Chicago, the study we've been doing, foreclosures are growing 12 times faster in suburban counties than they are in Cook County, where Chicago is. And it's no accident. It looks like that the rising cost of transportation was as much of a trigger as the increase in subprime mortgages and the loss of jobs. I mean, it's just real simple. And it works the other way. The places that we've all been working in that are transit-oriented are less exposed to those costs. How do we get that message across collectively? Again, it's a challenge both to you guys to respond to, but I think to Rail Volution as we think about framing the continuing program here so that, in fact, we address it directly instead of implicitly. And then the third point is that we grew up as a nation. I mean, you're very eloquent on this, but we grew up as a nation that could count on a growing economy because we invested in productivity, we invested in things we could all be included in, and this resulted in a high-wage economy. Unfortunately, it was a high-waste economy, but it was a high-wage economy. In the last 20 years, we worked like hell to turn this into a low-wage, high-waste economy. And we're not going to get out of the mess we're in unless we turn it back into a higher-wage, lower-waste economy. So it seems like the rhetoric that we've got needs to appeal to the interests of where people are at right now. It's a related question. How do we do that? How do we make that shift so that we become the essential part of the leading edge of what needs to change? Any response is welcome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, Scott has always framed the question, I think, in a very positive way. And basically, Scott, what you're saying is that this pattern of development that most of the people in this room have always seen as the problem isn't just sort of an esoteric, intellectual discussion about whether we should have sprawl and large lot development or not. It basically, has taken several $1 trillion out of the retirement portfolios and home equity of every American. And that's a really expensive hobby to continue that trend. And so what we're talking about doing is fundamentally changing. Things that can happen in Washington is that the federal government, now that it owns all the lending agencies, in theory can change the way they send out money, disincentivize development, ex-urban outlying development that's automobile-oriented, incentivize the urban and suburban reinvestments, where you've got transit or you've got the potential to create a TOD and so forth. Beyond that, but the action's got to be at the local level too. We got to change. The real problem is that 90% of the zoning authorities in this country have pulled up the drawbridge to the kind of development that we want to promote, and at the same time have zoned for, it's probably, Scott, you know better than anybody in the room, it's probably a 150-year supply of ex-urban large lot zoned land. So that's got to change. Federal government can't change that. That's got to change at the local level, which goes back to all of us to be advocates in our own communities and our own regions to change those things.
Well, and Scott, you are right on the money that we have to be talking about this in economic terms. I mean, even just from the pragmatic side of wanting our agenda to continue beyond this year. I mean, remember, healthcare is before us. We're going to have an energy bill before we have a transportation bill. We are way down on the national food chain if the way that we talk about this is about, sprawl or development. And yet, we do have a role to play in beginning to make these connections. Sam Zimbabwe and Jeff Wood were showing me these unbelievably great maps right before we started this session that show for 6 or 7 regions across the country the percentage of job concentrations with access to transit is mostly in the 10, 12, 15% of jobs range. We actually haven't connected jobs to transit if we really look at how people, where we're building and what we're building. And so this movement has done a great job at looking at the residential side of things. Let's just get really strong about demanding that if we're going to build new job centers, they have to be connected in ways that allow people to get there for work affordably. So, it comes at all different scales. Sometimes it's really hard for us to transform ourselves into a different kind of messenger, and I understand that. And, that's why we have the speech writers who are going to be focusing on the messaging and doing the polling and keeping all this going. But we have to also deliver on it. And it's not acceptable anymore to be planning these regions without thinking both about where people live and how they get to work and thinking about that in an integrated way.
Okay,
Please.
Thank you. Shelley, you mentioned earlier that CDBG funds can now be used to as leverage for possible transportation. I'm wondering if through the partnership, if that's been discussed about the different funding sources, if there's would it be more of a coordinated approach as to how they'll be allocated either to the states or to regional governments, or to coordinate with each other through regional offices?
Well, it's interesting. We recently went through the drill for the 2011 federal budget. Basically, the second day I showed up, they said, "Oh, Shelley, we got to work on the budget. You're it." So I got assigned to the team that worked on the budget. And in addition to having to provide pretty detailed rationale for what HUD was doing, we were invited for the first time to be part of the interviews for the other partner federal agencies. And one of the questions that actually the White House asked was, would you be willing to create a pool of funds that could be used for sustainable communities? So HUD puts in money, DOT puts in money, EPA puts in money. I think that that had never been considered before. I mean, it's something that I know that Secretary Donovan has explicitly said that he'd be willing to do. It's complicated. It's unbelievably complicated. But it's possible that we could get to that point. Before that, I think that one of the sort of ahas of the staff level of this interagency partnership is that we're learning a lot about how our various federal agencies operate and what pools of funding we have and where we have the flexibility or not to align resources. And, you know, we haven't made the transformation in CDBG funds to be able to do this yet. It's got the attorneys just chewing on it right now. But that's the kind of thing that we're trying to do, is to see, you know, how can we use our various different pools of funds so that when a community wants to build or invest in things that, you know, are very holistic, that we can, you know, connect up the various pots of money to be able to make whole places and not just the transportation piece or the housing piece, but we want the urban agriculture piece, we want the education piece, we want the health and human services piece, all of it aligned. And that, you know, that's the goal. It's going to take a lot of work to make that happen.
Okay, Katrina?
Well, in the spirit of your to-do list that you're developing,
Yeah.
and on the red tape issue in particular, I have a couple items to suggest, and maybe, Shelley, you can bring these back to some of your environmental partners. But the project that I'm working on, we're going to spend more time in environmental permitting than we will in actual construction. And I think this is probably shared with many of my colleagues around the room who have been working on transit.
To restore rail service on
An existing right-of-way.
rail lines that have been there for 125 years.
Absolutely, right, exactly. So you're getting to it, yeah.
Well, it's very important to understand what the changes might be in those rights-of-way. Absolutely. You know, there could be rare forms of mold growing in the old...
Yes, well, yes. We're very, very concerned
You'd
about
wanna
those
know.
species, yes.
You'd wanna know.
Well, actually, this goes right to it, Bob. So, you know, I talked to our environmental partners about, well, we've got a climate solution that we're trying to build. We're going to take 300,000 vehicle miles traveled off the road every day. And, you know, climate, we know, is going to contribute to species extinction, say the polar bear. And it's going to contribute to destroying
We're going to
wetlands.
save the polar bear in Fall River? Is that what we're...
Yeah. And we've got wetlands that are going to be flooded by tidewaters and sea, and we've got groundwater that's going to be evaporating. So we've got these major challenges as we look at the climate crisis. So I said, well, how are you going to weigh the benefits that we might have in our small little drop of helping to save the polar bear against some particular impacts we might have on state-listed rare species salamanders? And they looked at me cross-eyed, right? So my suggestion is that we need to look at some of the federal laws that were constructed in the 1970s and say, well, let's not just choose these routes that have the least amount of environmental damage, but what about the ones that have the most environmental benefit? We need to be looking at that and not just the local impacts, but the global benefits that we are trying to create with all the work that we do. My second suggestion, just on the federal level, is at the state level, we have very recognizable deadlines in our environmental review process. They're embedded in our regulations and our laws. We do not have that equivalent at the federal level. And so what we find is that we all feel the urgency of the issues that we're working on, but at the federal government, they don't work at that pace. So a project that we spend day after day working on right now isn't going to open until the year 2016. And we're looking at urgency in the next 3 years, as you said, Shelley. So these are a couple things that I think, they sound small, they'll be really big when you bring them out politically, but I think that they're worth considering on your to-do list. Thanks.
Thank you. That's really great.
Another project to put on that same list is the Northeast Corridor, where we've been told by FRA that to make improvements in the corridor that have been planned through the EIS process, local matches in place, designed, ready to put out bids, that before we invest in any of those things, and this is between DC and Boston, there are several projects that are ready to go. We've been told, well, really we need to do a new EIS for the entire Northeast Corridor. For a rail right-of-way, it's been there for 140 years. But if it were a privately owned railroad, you wouldn't need to do any of those things because those are categorically exempt, but because it's in public ownership, we need to do this. So we have, literally billions of dollars worth of projects that are going to be on hold for a year. Now, if we only had an economic crisis, maybe we could cut through some of this red tape, but, it's terribly frustrating. So somehow we've got to, I used to work in environmental affairs. I believe in this stuff, but we've got to focus all of these regulatory and environmental reviews on the projects and activities that are really damaging, and then find ways to break loose the things that can move ahead. I remember it's possible to do it. I know right after 9/11 in New York, we lost 4 of the 11 subway lines in Lower Manhattan, and they were literally crushed by the towers when they came down. And we were given some waivers by FHWA. Basically, Chuck Schumer and Hillary Clinton were just beating them up to do it. We got some waivers, and we were able to rebuild subway lines from scratch through that area so that they reopened in less than a year. So we know we can do it, so we just have to. We've really got to take this sense of urgency that the public feels, and it's tied to this. Scott put his finger on the issue here. It's 10, 11, 12% unemployment rates. Now's the time to pull out the stops to get this stuff right. And by the way, it's not just the environmental regulations, it's all the procurement processes and all this stuff. It takes forever. The public doesn't want to live with it anymore, so let's change it. And that's a message we'd hope you'd take back. So, okay,
Hello,
We
I'm
just
from
have a few more minutes, too.
Yeah.
I'm from St. Paul, Minnesota, and I'm here representing small businesses along a new transit corridor that's going to be built. And I just want to say that I've been pretty lonely here in bringing up what about livable communities. It means small businesses that you can walk to, that you can have good jobs in, and it's the economy. And so I wanted to thank you so much for continuing to talk about the economy and how it's not just about building affordable housing and transit lines, but we have to have those communities where they not only have links to jobs, transit links to jobs, but jobs right in their communities they can walk to or live above or whatever. And so my question to you is, even President Obama is starting to talk about small businesses and relief and that kind of thing, but it's always loans. And for a lot of these businesses, that would be the thing that would put them over the edge as they go through construction of a light rail project or something like that. So I'd love to challenge you to look at ways to really look at the economic piece, include the mom and pops and their struggles and how we can really support them so that as these communities gain all sorts of wonderful amenities, that they're a part of it and not just pushed out by the Starbucks and all of those other corporate type things that will make our communities the same across the country as opposed to their unique identities and good jobs. So can you come up with anything besides loans? Can you?
Well, I'll look into it. I think this is really incredibly important. Carol Coletta, who facilitated the plenary the other day from CEOs for Cities, has been documenting the recycling of dollars into local businesses and local community economies when there are robust options for people to get around. And that has been a really powerful argument for people. I mean, I think that the reality is that we have a lot of education to do to connect the dots between what kinds of transportation investments we're making and the kinds of communities that we want to see. And we need to get some more tools in the toolbox, and I'd like to learn more about what you think would be helpful. So maybe come talk to me afterwards.
I will. Thank you so much.
Let's do rapid response on these two. You're going to see something. This is the new federal government in action. Rapid response. Here we go.
Okay, well, you have some good to-dos, and I'm going to add two more.
Okay.
First, the point was mentioned about the bank procedures, and it was mentioned as sort of a point, but I'd like to suggest that it be a to-do. Chris Lineberger and others have written that there really are crazy reasons that steer bank loans towards this sprawl and away from the smart development where there's so much demand. That's point one. Point two, tying to the economic theme. I hear the Secretary of Energy talking a lot about the transformation of the economic future of America around smart grid and clean energy jobs. I don't hear enough about the transportation part of that. There's so much demand for high-speed rail and additional transit projects. That should be a central part of the future green economy, and I think tying to that would give this additional drive.
Yeah. Point well taken. Thank you. Right. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name's Emily Drennan. I'm the former executive director for a small nonprofit in San Francisco called Walk San Francisco, pedestrian advocacy organization. And when you were talking about sort of a to-do list or who might be out there, advocates tend to do all the work for free. As you know, I mean, you're the former executive director of two nonprofits, so I don't have to tell you, but you've got people who are passionate about this, obviously, who are spending their own time and money, mostly, doing tons and tons of yeoman's work for no pay. But a little bit of pay to those nonprofits to do advocacy and policy work would go a huge long distance. I mean, our nonprofit doesn't have any staff because we couldn't raise money, yet we were doing work that nobody else was doing in our city. So there you go. Anything, little dribbles would help.
Well, this is a really important issue, and I think we've talked about how the federal government can provide that kind of those modest incentives to engage the civic community, help build capacity in the civic community. It's vitally important. You're making light of it. It's not a light issue. It's a very important issue. So thank you. Right? Yeah. Other thoughts? Yeah.
I totally agree.
Great. Thanks, everybody. We're done?
Well, he's going to close us up.
Thank you both. That was a great way to end a great conference. And I confess I'm not 100% sure of the outcome of our coin toss, but I think you're still in the city of Boston, and next year you'll be in the city of Portland. And assuming that is the case, on behalf of Governor Patrick and all of us, thank you so much for being in Boston and in Massachusetts this year, and we look forward to seeing you in Portland in 2010.